Guys, sorry, I had to take a phone call. Right, I want to get back to the Mathew Mezinczkis stream here. 1 second. Let me go back to my X. Right, so we're about halfway done with this analysis, but there's some really interesting points. Here, let me go into this. Okay, right. Okay, here we go. All right. So I covered this. This is where I was, the fourth observation, right? So basically, Mathew does this ratio of bank money relative to state money, right? Which is, he looks at kind of the bank reserves and he does the ratio of the total M3 to that. What you can see here is that we have this just huge drop here, right, in the U.S. At 2008, and then it's been decreasing ever since. It's a slight increase right now. But basically, we've got all this it's sort of like a coiled spring, right? It really we could have much more printing than what we have right now. So the picture he's painting is that where banks are ultra cautious, and they could be lending a lot more than what they are lending right now. Anyways, that's the picture in the U.S. and in Japan, and potentially even more in Japan than now. This is sort of another observation, which is just the size of the Japanese market. Japan is now only a third of the size of the U.S., which is kind of remarkable, kind of given where these things were in the late 80s, right? Right now we are really in a dollar economy, and Japan is a $10 trillion money supply, but the U.S. is at 36 trillion. So really, the size of the Japanese monetary system is much, much less than the U.S. right now. And even though the reserves, the fact that reserves are so much bigger. So it's sort of like they need to push massively to get any loans out of this banking system. And then then the conversation shifts to Bitcoin here. And this is something I would recommend to everybody to look at. This is Mathew's own sort of power trend. He calls it the power trend, which I really like that nomenclature. So basically what we're saying is, instead of calling it a power law and irritating people, just say it's a power trend. It's the trend of Bitcoin prices in log space. And so one thing he does is, rather than look at a standard deviation band, he just sort of looks at, okay, let's look at the trend line, which is easily calculated. Right now it's at around 104, I think. We're basically at trend line, and ask ourselves, when do we get at 2 times trend line, at 2.5 times trend line, etc. So let's just go into this this thing a little bit more carefully, and let's look at this graph here, and you can sort of see here at 2 times trend line, there's only 10% of the data that goes over 2 times trend line, and then if you get up to 3 times trend line, then you're really only at 3% there. Okay, which means that there's very few days that we're actually going to be over 2 times trend line, and it turns out that number is about 90 days, right? So we don't spend more than 2 times. We don't spend a lot of time more than 2 times the power law. And I think that's a really good reminder. So everybody is expecting Bitcoin will go much higher than 100,000. Okay, great. So how much time is it going to spend over, say, 125,000, right? Which is kind of where we'll be at the end of the year on the trend line. Well, it certainly will probably get there. We'll probably get to 250, but we'll probably not spend more than 90 days. At least if you look at the previous 3 cycles, that's what's happened. You have not spent a ton of time over the thing. And as Matthew says, it's really hard to predict. Could it be 6 months? Possibly. Could it be 2 months? Possibly. Could there be a double top? Sure, there could. We don't know, right? But the history of this thing is that we don't spend a lot of time in these super bubble periods. And, this is something he shows, which I think is really good, which is this graph. And this is from Checkmate. Checkmate has this graph of OGs selling out. So this isn't paper Bitcoin. This is people like me who, a lot of me's and a bunch of people who are mega me's selling out, Bitcoin that they've been holding for 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years, right? So, there are these spikes, and people do sell. So it's not paper Bitcoin; it's OG sellers of Bitcoin, and that's just a fact. This is what people do. When you have life-changing wealth, people take the thing. And here's his last observation, which I think is another great chart, which I would have never thought of personally, but I think it's fantastic. And that is just looking at the Bitcoin power trend and looking at the growth of world-based money, which is an exponential, right? So we have Bitcoin, that's a power trend. It's currently about 43% CAGR. And again, when I say the CAGR here, I mean the CAGR of the trend line, right? Not the historical realized CAGR, which is a different number, and it was a higher number, right? So a lot of people are like, well, the CAGR of Bitcoin over the last 5 years has been 60%. Well, that's true, but the trend line is CAGRing at a 43%. So if you just map out the trend line going forward, it's going at a reduced rate, right? But that's what power trends do. It's a slowly decreasing CAGR. But if you look at it, that number still is way higher than the exponential growth of money supply, which is just under 10% right now. And the question is, when do they cross? Well, they're gonna cross sometime in around 2043, and that's when the amount of Bitcoin is actually going to exceed the value of the Bitcoin is going to actually exceed all other basic money, right? And that's this point here where they cross. It's 2043, and he makes a point. It's probably going to happen before then, right? So sometime in the next 15 years, right, Bitcoin is going to become the dominant base money. Doesn't mean it's going to be hyper Bitcoinization. It just means that we're going to be at even with fiat. So I think the lesson here is that, look, it's going to take a while. And by the way, at this point, we are going to be in the millions of dollars per Bitcoin. Right? So if you're going to plan on sticking around this planet until 2043, we're probably going to be in a heavy Bitcoin world by 2043. And we're going to be at millions of dollars of Bitcoin. It doesn't mean that we're all going to be using Bitcoin for everything. It just means that Bitcoin will be kind of it'll be the dominant asset at that point. Anyways, so hey Thomas, good to see you. If you want an intro, I'll intro you up. Let me see if I can give you a little. Let me see. Well, I'll just catch you on Bitcoin today. I'm going to join that space in a bit. But yeah, so I just think, guys, I really recommend you going to this, watching Matthew. He's in Latvia, so it's probably unlikely you're going to catch one of his things live. They tend to be at like 3 in the morning, my time, 6 in the morning, East Coast. Still pretty early. And they're a little long, these things. You know, it's sort of like sitting in on a PhD course or something. But it's worth going through these numbers. And I think, you know, the whole point is, yes, Mezinczkis. Yeah, that's it, Mezinczkis. Let me see if I can give Thomas an invite or anybody else. How do I do that? Okay. Invite. Where's my email? I don't even know how to invite people at this point. I'll do it later. But yeah, this is Mathew Mezinczkis. I think this analysis, which the title of this chart is to do with Japanese money supply. That's a country I spent quite a bit of time in and trading. But I think it's really interesting that Japan really has kicked the can down the road quite a bit, and it tells me that we probably can kick it down further. It's probably not going to blow up in the next 3 to 4 years, but this is kind of an extenuated timeline, and I think it's very believable. This scenario is very believable. Anyways, I'm going to join the spaces. I just want to kind of solidify my thoughts on this great video. I looked at this stuff and there were 7 likes on this thing. I'm like, man, this got all these charts, like the best charts I've seen on Bitcoin, and 7 likes is just it's insane. Like, why is nobody following this? M3 to GDP, right? Velocity is very low because all the money has been moved from the banking system to basically the Fed, right? So it's all this QE that's happening that's sucking up all the liquidity, and the banks are very cautious, and so they're not lending it out super fast. And it does kind of seem like we're going to be going into just we're going to become very Japanese. I think that seems to be what's going to happen here. But I don't know. I think it was a very interesting video. I would not even attempt to say I understand the Chinese side of this at all. I think after watching this, I vaguely understand where the Japanese side of this equation is. But there's so much money out there. It's just so much that the minute they stop this money tightening, which is what the Federal Reserve's been doing for the last 3 years, if you reverse that trend from the last 3 years of money QT, I think we're going to absolutely have the biggest risk on summer around. And I think this will coincide with, a big, beautiful fall, and maybe a Bitcoin winter early next year. Who knows? But I am leaning to the idea that we could have a massive rally followed by a massive crash. That's kind of my base case. I'm not trying to FUD anybody. I'm not trying to sell my Bitcoin or anything, but I do think that's probably likely to generate what Matthew calls the Maalox moment. So I'm going to end it here. I'm going to be on Spaces on and off today. I'll talk to you guys.